You're muted. Yeah.
Hi there,
Hi there,
everybody.
everybody.
We've got a
We've
little
got a
echo
little echo
happening here.
happening
I
here. I
apologize about
apologize
that.
about
We
that.
were
We're
looking to
looking to
fix
fix
that,
that,
but
but
hopefully y'all
hopefully
can
y'all can
hear
hear
well. If
well.
not,
If not,
please mention
please
in the
mention in the
comments.
comments.
My name is
My name is
Susan,
Susan,
and
and
I
I'm
am from
from
Carmichael
Carmichael
Bookstore. We are
Bookstore. We are
so
so
honored
honored
to
to
be here
be here
for a
for a
debut event
debut
for
event for
Simon Van
Simon Van
Booy's
Booy's
Night
Night
Came
Came
with Many
with Many
Stars,
Stars,
which is
which
on our
is on our
bookshelf.
bookshelf.
We're very
We're very
happy to
happy
share
to
this
share
book
this
with
book
you
with you,
and hope
and hope
everybody gets a
everybody gets
chance
a
to read
chance to
it.
read it.
We are.
Are
I'm here
I'm
in
here in
Kentucky, where the
where
book
the book
takes
takes
place.
place.
Simon
Simon
is
is
in
in
Vienna,
Vienna,
and
and
our
our
friend
friend
Billy
Billy
OCallaghan
OCallaghan
here
here
is
is
in
in
Cork,
Cork,
Ireland.
Ireland.
Uh,
Uh,
Midnight in
Midnight in
Ireland
Ireland,
and 1
and
a.m.
1
in
a.m. in
Vienna.
Vienna.
So
So
thanks for
thanks for
sharing a
sharing a
bedtime
bedtime
story with
story
us.
with us.
I'd just
I'd
like
just
to
like to
remind
remind
everybody that
everybody
you
that
can
you can
buy the
buy the
book
book
and
and
the
the
call to
call to
action
action
button
button
below.
below.
And if you'd
And
like
if
to
you'd like
add
to add the
comments,
comments,
that will be
that will
to
be
the
to
right.
the right.
And you can
And you
ask
can
a
ask a
question
question
in
in
the
the
bar
bar
below as
below as
well.
well.
Of course,
Of course,
please
please
be
be
polite and
polite and
classy.
classy.
We'll take
We'll
it
take it
away,
away.
and
And
I'll
I'll
leave it to the
leave the
gentleman
gentleman
over
over
here to
here
take
to
over.
take over.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Billy, and I'm here to chat with Simon about his fantastic new book. Uh, but I think, as the time is past midnight now here, maybe let's kick straight in and ask Simon if he'll do a bit of a reading for us, and we'll take things from there then. Okay?
Thanks, Billy.
Thanks, Billy.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
It's so kind
It's
of
so
Billy
kind of Billy
to
to
join
join
us
us
from
from
Ireland
Ireland
because Billy's
because
actually one
Billy's
of my
actually one of
favourite
my
writers.
favourite
So
writers.
it's a
So
thrill to
it's
do
a
this
thrill
event
to do
with
this
him.
event with him.
And if there's too
And
much
if
of
there's too much
an
of
echo,
an
just
echo,
pretend
just
you're in a
pretend you're
Doctor
in a
Who
Doctor Who
episode.
episode.
Okay, so let
Okay,
me
so
do
let me do
read a
read
little bit.
a little bit.
Uh,
Uh,
do I
do I
try a southern
try a
accent?
southern accent?
Can't get cancelled. If the meeting suddenly gets cancelled, I know it was a bad idea. Okay, so let me read a little bit.
Maybe if I mute mine, it might help.
Okay. Um, After checking for his truck in the front yard, Carol hurried downstairs to scour the cupboards. Can you hear me okay? Great. After checking for his truck in the front yard, Carol hurried downstairs to scour the cupboards for some breakfast. She sang because the house was empty. Her voice filled each room like invisible writing. Finally, under the stairs, in a crate hidden by some Model T tyres, she discovered flour in a round tin the government had given them last year. She carried it to the kitchen table, then went outside to the well, still barefoot and moving quickly through the wet, nodding grass and green weeds. Carol knew the water was cold from how the rope held in her hands. The bucket glugged from a black pool fed by a slow river that was even deeper than the bones of her grandpa, who had died in a ploughed field with no sound, just a quick folding up into the brown waves. Carol could hardly speak then, but she remembered the body being brought to the house with his face the colour of winter. Her father sold the land after that, put down the old man's tools and picked up a bottle, a deck of cards, a gun when necessary. Carol hauled the full bucket inside, trying not to spill. Her daddy would return soon, and like a dark spirit, see through every fallen drop, as if each were an eye, and her life a succession of small, glaring mistakes. She had woken up hungry, with the desire for an egg. but the chickens were long gone. A scar on her back proved it. Sometimes Carol reached around and fingered the scar, pushed on the memory knitted beneath. The henhouse door had been left open and coyotes got in. The morning her father had found it empty, he yanked and ripped at the coop until it rose like a stiff net. There was spit whipping from his mouth as he pulled at the frame, snapping thin ribs of wood. Carol had squeezed into a kitchen cupboard where she could smell the sweat from behind her knees. She thought about crawling under the porch, but the darkness there, the rotting planks and those limp, eyeless creatures roaming the damp soil was terror of a different kind. When her daddy came to a wood slat that wouldn't break, his rage changed course and he followed it into the house, eyes churning with fury. That was years ago now, though Carol still liked to imagine the coyotes' eyes glowing with careful intent as they carried her father's birds, wet in their mouths, to a place more smell than touch. When Carol outgrew the cupboards, she made for the deep woods, where she could be lost without being lost from herself. Refuge, an exhalation, except when snow lay thick and drifted, and the cold tore at anything it could touch. Then Carol waited for spring the way a person waits for some beloved friend who has already begun the long journey home. At the end of winter, with the cold still loose but weak, Carol would enter the woods, wade through currents of dead leaves, watching for a single eye of colour that meant it was close. She wondered where those early flowers came from, how they knew the moment to blink their eyes in the soil. A small clearing in the forest was Carol's favourite place. She could lie on her back beneath the blank canvas of sky. When her mother was alive, they would spread a yellow cloth, then sit and eat apples. Carol cannot remember anything her mother said, only the sound of her voice, and that she sometimes took off her shoes and unfastened her hair so that it tumbled like ribbon upon her shoulders and neck. Carol found some dry branches near the back door and broke the wood into pieces. Then she lit a fire in the stove and mixed flour, baking powder, and the remnants of butter lifted from the dish with her finger. When the fire was really going, Carol used a rag to drop open the stove's heavy door. Heat flooded the room as she slid in the greasy pan. There was nothing to do after that but sit and wait with her cotton Mary Bright, hoping her father would not return before her biscuits were ready. He said she was too old for the doll, but Mary Bright disagreed and would not be put away. Carol also had to hide the fairy picture she had pinned up by her bed, the one that came alive when the moon breathed on it. Fire cracked the bones of sticks. Carol imagined her doll's bones tucked safely into plump cotton flesh. Then she waited, staring at flames that flickered on the surface of her eyes. The grease in the pan was melting quickly. The biscuits would rise from the heat and light. Like Jesus, Carol thought, our Saviour. She tried to remember his eyes from the Bible pictures at school, but years had passed since she had sat in the classroom, her feet resting on dusty floor planks. The smell of cooking biscuits soon filled the kitchen. Carol imagined hammering and the reluctant hands of carpenters putting his cross together. The wood had once just been an innocent tree, she thought. Before that, a seed in the earth, like a tiny eye about to open. Carol stroked her doll's hair. Jesus had flowing locks, she thought. He loved everybody, but that wasn't enough. They killed him anyway. People watched it happen as though they had something to gain. She thought about those people, wondered where they went after. Home to meals they ate with bare hands. Could they sleep that night after what they had seen, or did they lay awake in their straw beds, suspended over sleep, crucified themselves by pity for those ebbing bodies on the hill? The look on Jesus' face in the darkness, thought Carol, with no one watching, would have been the pain of disappointment. She knew it well. Maybe all fathers needed forgiving for what they did, or what they didn't do. Even the good ones, like her granddaddy, whose death, her mother once said, set free the pain he had fought to save them from. Carol folded Mary Bright's apron 2 times, then 3. Tried to feel the numb hands and numb feet that Jesus himself must have felt on the day of his crucifixion. Once they'd been children's feet, small and warm like baking biscuits. It was his mama Carol felt most sorry for. She had promised to keep him safe. He was her little baby. Her pain was the worst of all because it was for someone else. She would just learn to live with it, like a shadow no one else can see. I think I've tortured you enough with that, so I'll stop there.
No, it was beautiful. That's a beautiful piece of writing, and it's a beautiful novel. I suppose a family saga in the truest sense of the term. It spans about 80 years, 1933 through to 2010, I think, and it's immense in scope. It has a kind of an immensity in scope, and yet it's wonderfully intimate, which is what really elevates it for me, I think. And I think that only can happen when the writer is mining the deepest truths. And we had spoken before. You had mentioned your connection with Kentucky. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about where the book came from, the inspiration behind it, and
Thanks, Billy. You said such lovely things. Feel free to keep going if you want. I'm just happy to listen. Incidentally, before I answer that question, Billy recently had a book come out in Britain and Ireland, and
Simon, forget about me tonight and worry about yourself.
You see what kind of person Billy is. It's that Irish hospitality and kindness. I will tell you about Billy's book, but a bit later there. I lived in Kentucky for a few years, and I became very close friends with somebody there, and I became close friends with his family. And we kept in touch, and we had just had a very strong connection. The sort that if terrible things happened to each other, we would be there for each other, and as quick as we could. It was a very, very close connection, and over the last 30 years, we've kept in touch. And every time I'd visit, I'd be given a new family story, and it got to the point where I had so many, I felt like this wasn't just the story of one family; it was the story actually of many families. It was in many ways the story of America, so I struggled for a long time to see what kind of format to write it in, how I could go back and forth in time. Because as writers, I think, we have ideas, but then we have to have the skills. Like carpenters, we can only work within the level of our abilities at that time. So as soon as I could try and cobble something together, I did. And then my editor at Godine, Joshua Bodwell, he turned the book from basically scraps and post-it notes into something. If you like this book, you can blame him. You can blame my editor.
I was going to maybe get into the craft side of things a little bit with you in a while, if that's okay, because I don't often get an opportunity to talk about the craft with other writers. I know some writers, but not in a way that this is what we end up talking about. So we might get into that a little bit, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was there's clearly a sense of this being a labour of love for you. This is something, I don't think you could write a book like this unless you felt particularly attached to the characters, to the people, true based on truth, partly truth and partly fiction, whatever the combination is. They're as real as anybody walking the roads, and I think anyone who reads the book will see that. But yeah, what I wanted to ask you was, what was the most challenging aspect of writing a book like this when you're dealing with stories that were passed on to you. What's the difficulties with that?
I suppose the difficulty is you only know so much. So say, some of it has to be made up in order to bridge it. Because if you think about memories, and if we think about our lives, we don't think chronologically, just random. I mean, memory is like a drunk librarian that just keeps dropping things into our laps, You just don't. I mean, I hope that's not just me. Everybody has that. Just the brain just sends you random memories and with no real explanation. So when you've got strong stories, the difficulty was how do I link them into an actual novel? Because, you know, the novel form has rules, and you can break those rules, but writers have broken them, and it often doesn't work. So there are rules for a reason. It's because they work. They give the reader a certain experience. So working within the parameters of a novel, that was tough. Like bridging the stories I knew, together so it wouldn't seem like a fractured narrative. What's funny is, some of the bits I had to make up. No, none of the early readers had a problem with that. The bits that were true, they were like, that didn't happen. I'm like, actually, that's the true part. So it did happen.
Yeah, yeah. That the very same thing happens to me. Um, people have the truth is more difficult to believe, I think, sometimes than the fiction. Um, Sorry, I have a bit of a cold, and I spent 8 hours in the rain this morning, so it didn't do me much good. Um, um, I know you since 20, I don't know, 2009, I think, something like that, 2008, 2009. So it's a long time, and I've been reading your books a long time, and it's no secret to anyone that you're one of my very favourite writers. You're somebody that I always looked up to and admired. And I say this even behind your back, so you don't have to feel embarrassed about it. But I just get the feeling, I've never read anything of yours that I didn't love. But when I read this book, I feel this book it feels like uh, a craftsman who's coming really to become a master of his craft. I can see this is this. There's nothing out of place in this book. It really feels it really feels tight. But you've written. I'd have to count them. This is your fourth novel. You've written 4 collections of short stories, numerous books. So you've been around. You've been around the block. Um, what's the challenge for a writer at this point of his career? What motivates you to to keep going and do better? And what inspires you now? I mean, you've had great success. You've won big prizes. You've had great reviews. Your books have been translated all over the world. But what is it now that inspires you? I suppose that motivates you to do better than the last one. You know.
Yeah, that's a really really good question, and I'd almost like to ask you to answer it after I've answered too. So if I'm going to say what you were going to say, you can't say that's what I was going to say. Anyway, so actually, it's the same as when I first started. What inspires me, and that is just the idea that I can communicate something through language that opens a door in the reader into a room that they've never been in. Because basically, I want to do for my readers what writers do for me, what artists do for me, which is, that feeling when you connect with a painting or a book. You know that feeling. It feels really personal, and it feels like you've got a roadmap to somewhere. It's like looking in a mirror but seeing yourself slightly differently. So I think that, and that's why it's so important to keep reading and staying inspired. The older I get, the more I become a bit reclusive. But I have to resist that because, for instance, when you go to an art gallery or anywhere, or to see stock cars racing or something, something is gonna. It's good to have new experiences and connect with the world, and so you don't know what it's going to be. You might just see somebody walking on the street holding a shoe, or you might be driving in the country and almost hit a frog. You don't know what's going to catch. It's almost like it catches your heart like a little hook, and it tugs, and and then you just follow that thread at your computer and hope it leads somewhere. But if there's no emotional connection, I would stop. I'd work in a shop, menswear, something. There has to be an emotional connection, and also I don't really choose what to write in that way. I mean, I choose what to write with the same luck as I choose what to dream at night, meaning I don't choose. So that's why it's also a bit. It's worrying, because what if I want to write about something that, involves a lot of research? That would be horrible. So I feel like in the imagination I'm free, and as long as I stay free, I feel like I'll be able to write books. The moment I think I have any conditions on what I can and can't write, I think, you can't do that as an artist. I think there's good and bad writing, because no writing can be worse than what we've done to each other as humans, and no writing can be as good as what we do for each other. So I think there's either writing which feels connectable in real life, and there's writing which isn't. In terms of the craft, I'm more interested in the craft than really anything else. When I meet other writers, I really want to ask them questions about things that I can't figure out. And so when people say to me, Simon, I think I want to be a writer, I say, well, that's fantastic. So just start practicing. Learn your craft. Read as a writer. With a pen. Copy out sentences from books that are interesting to you, and figure out why, what makes them work, and just get experience. And eventually, you'll write something and it will be good, and you'll feel fantastic. What inspires you, Billy?
Just what you said. No, I think for me, it's been a maybe a little bit different, because I never had any confidence in myself, in what I was doing. I always felt I was in a deep hole trying to dig my way out of something, and the thing that keeps me going is that I can see that my books are getting better as I go. I'm figuring out things that I didn't understand before. And I think also at the same time I'm going deeper and deeper into myself for the work. But I mean, like, one of the things that always strikes me about your writing is, not necessarily stylistically, but in my mind, I always have you in the same bracket as Steinbeck, because I see the sort of the humanity, that's very strong in Steinbeck's work, and it was something that always drew me to your writing. Alistair MacLeod had the Canadian writer had a line in his novel No Great Mischief, and it says, all of us are better when we're loved. And that to me is your writing in a nutshell, because that seems to be the thing that I take from, like, terrible things happen in this book, really awful things happen, and yet there's that sense of wanting love and being saved by love all the time. um, uh, and I think that makes it something very special. It makes your writing something very special, because it's I don't know if it's a romantic, if it's that you're romantic, in your heart, but it's a great thing to aspire to, I think. Um, uh, I think I have some darker corners of my heart. I, but so yeah, that's my bit of an answer for you. But we'll get back to your stuff. Uh, I have some notes that I can't read the writing. Um, yeah, this novel, when you were writing this particular novel, just to continue on the subject of craft, um, did you write? First of all, do you plot? Do you plan out your books? Are you somebody that plans, your work in advance, or are you somebody that finds the story as you write it? And then also with this particular novel, because of the structure that it has, did you write it in sequence, or did you write carols? I mean, I'm talking about first early drafts. Did you write Carol's story, Samuel's story, or what was your approach to writing this kind of a book?
Um, it's funny because every book is a bit different. I don't know if you found the same thing, but this book, I actually did plan it out. I planned out chapter by chapter what I wanted to, what the subject of each chapter was about, because I was taking the family stories and I was putting them down, and then I was looking at the pieces, the puzzle I didn't know, and so then I would have to. So I did actually plan this out, but The Illusion of Separateness, a novel I wrote a few years ago, that was not planned out. That was actually written on an iPad with a wireless keyboard as one long footnote, because I just felt like if I see page one, it's like, oh God, only 200 pages to go. Torture. So as writing The Illusion of Separateness as a footnote, I just didn't have to worry about pages. And then, like, after a while, I thought I'd better probably save it. And it turned out it was like 15,000 words. I couldn't believe it. So sometimes I have page anxiety where, you have to climb some, the elevator's broken and you've got to take the steps and you're knackered from the day, you're tired. So, but then I don't know what my next book will be. It might be intuitive, where I just find the story as I write. One of my favorite writers, um, recently she wrote a book called Beneficence, which is also published by Godine. It's a fantastic book. And she writes chapter one and never goes back to it. Writes chapter two, never goes back to it. It's almost like everything is a snow globe, and when it's done, it's sealed. And I find that approach really, really interesting from a craft point of view. I might try that. I might try that approach. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I completely agree. I find each book has its own life, and sometimes, like for me, I only know, maybe the last couple of books start to feel like I'm starting to know what I'm doing. that I'm getting, I'm not completely wasting my time with it. When I had a novel, My Coney Island Baby, and I spent 7 years writing it, and I never wanted anyone to see it. I was so anxious about it, but it became like my white whale. I couldn't, I was completely obsessed with it, to the point where finally I took the manuscript, I printed it out in single spaced 10-point font. I took it down to my parents' attic, and I cut out every paragraph, and I blue tacked the whole novel to the eaves of the house, and I edited it that way, cutting and pasting, physically cutting and pasting, and it was insanity, and I vowed I would never do that again. But at the same time, it released me from the book. So I suppose you do what it takes, what you have to do. But I'm interested with this one because, yeah, I'll come back to that question that I asked about whether you wrote Carol's story. I know you said you planned it out, but did you find it was easier to write those chapters in a sequence without interrupting, or did you actually switch back and forth in the writing of it?
I switched back and forth because, yeah, I switched back and forth. I don't know why, but it's funny what you said about being in the basement. Like if your parents came down and saw all these things on the wall, they think you'd become like a conspiracy theorist. But I suppose that's what writers are. They're strange people in attics and bedrooms and spare rooms and basements, sweating, laughing to themselves, screaming, crying to themselves, getting annoyed because they have to go to the toilet every 3 hours because that feels like, too much of an interruption. So the actual writing of a book, it's just such a weird, laborious procedure. There's just, there really is. Because you don't know if what you're going to do is work. It's like being a construction worker, and every day before you go home, the wall could fall down. No matter what you do, it could fall down. So it's weird. You need a lot of faith, I think, or determination. I think faith is better than determination, because determination is work. But I mean, people who have faith, it's like that. You don't need evidence. You just have faith. So I think faith is good to cultivate as a writer. Yeah. So I wrote them individually actually, and then as a writer, you go over and you give the illusion that you wrote it in one sitting. That's the illusion. You get rid of all the scenes.
Yeah, like that is interesting. The fate idea, because I probably lean more towards the just the discipline. The days that you don't feel like writing are the days you still have to write, and it becomes all consuming. But what I would like to ask you about, because I was a bit slower off the mark than you, but we both started out with short stories, and I think we both love the short story form, and I mentioned that it was kind of maybe an insecurity on my part, or some kind of an inner dread. I was afraid of a novel for a long time, and it's what you say about the fate side of it. Maybe I just lack fate, but I for a long time I was really afraid to commit to a novel, because you write a short story and you might spend a month writing it, and if it goes nowhere, then you've only lost a month of your life. But if you dive into a novel and it goes nowhere, you've lost 2 or 3 years maybe of your life. So I want to ask you how you felt jumping from, what brought you to the novel. Was it just that the ideas just got bigger, they got too big for short stories, or did you make a conscious choice? Was it just a natural progression? Um, just give us your thoughts on it, and then going back to the short story.
Um, that's a good question. I mean, the the honest answer is that I wrote a novel for money. Um, I'd like to say it was because I had a dream, and spirits descended with like playing harps, and they deposited cookies and cups of tea to fuel me on my quest. But my one of my early publishers gave me a contract and said a novel and a book of short stories, not So then I thought, novel, here we go. Oh, you know, shock horror. So I started reading novels because I think I have. I mean, I'm not diagnosed, but I think I have ADD because I find it very very hard to focus. Or if it starts raining, boop, it's gone. I got to start from the beginning. If somebody opens a door, if a fly goes past, it's like boop, I got to start all from the beginning. Um, so I have a very very hard time focusing. Yeah, it's okay. You can drive with me. I'm a safe driver. Just don't talk, or put the radio on. And see, I just lost my train of thought. Question. Oh yeah, novels. So I didn't really want to focus on a piece of fiction for like a long time. What I loved about short stories is, as you said, you can write them in a month and it's wonderful, and then it's finished. And hopefully it's okay. Uh, Another part of my personality is that I become very obsessive about like hobbies and things. So, one day I'll come home with a fishing pole and fishing gear and rubber boots. I'll be like, that's it. I'm going to devote my life to fishing from now on. And then like 2 months later, it's trampolining. Like, we need to move house because we need to have a place big enough for a trampoline. You know, and these are the people who've set trampolining records. And here's my letter to the Olympic Commission to make it an Olympic sport. So, I become interested in things like Toad from Wind in the Willows. So with a short story, you can have a short story, set in a dungeon in the medieval period, because you're interested in dungeons that month. And then the next month, when you're interested in basically how toilets flush, you can then write a story about a plumber. So and also you can connect to different things emotionally in a short story. So you can be more open to things coming to you to write it. But with a novel, you're like locked in the prison of the novel. Like you will not get out until you've finished the novel, with the same people and the same uh, pacing and the same rhythm and energy. And I don't really enjoy it that much. So I think that's why. I mean, I'm just a little secret, but my chapters, I have I have quite short chapters. Because that allows me at least to split it up. If I have to read a thick novel, I often get a cheap paperback and I cut it with a cleaver and just read 50 pages at a time. So if you give me like a 400-page novel, I'm like, no way. No way. I'll use it to step on to get the cookies in the top drawer. But so, and I feel a bit weird admitting that because I'm supposed to be a writer. But the fact is, like, it's not easy. I'm really intimidated by very long books So if anyone else is out there, you can still become a writer. Don't worry. So I would like to go back to short stories, but then novels also are quite interesting because there's a whole new set of rules. So I've come to quite enjoy novels in a weird way, but I think I'm going to start writing short novels like the French. Because then you get kind of the best of both worlds. Let's make the novella popular again, Billy.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Actually, when I wrote like sentences, my recent novel, my initial plan was to write a novella because the book is actually 3 sections, and it turned out to be that they're almost 3 standalone novellas, but they're interwoven. But my initial plan was that I was just going to write the first part, and I was halfway into that when I realised I was going to have to write the second part, and then so the book became what it became. But yeah, I agree. I think the novella is a beautiful form, um, because they're really just long short stories. You know, they're not to be feared, the way a novel is. I mean, I would imagine it would be very difficult now for a War and Peace to be published, or not to be published. I'm sure they'd be published, but you know, I doubt they'd sell particularly well, because it's a big commitment now to sit down and read, Proust, the whole shebang. It's difficult. So will we open things up to some questions, if I can figure out how to do it. Ask a question maybe. Yeah, okay. There's a question here from Jude. The southern dialect feels so authentic. How did you approach writing the dialogue, given that the diction, rhythm, dialect is so different from your own? Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a good question. Well, I lived in Kentucky for a few years, and I am really curious and interested in language. I mean, even I was in a Turkish restaurant because I quite enjoy Middle Eastern food in Vienna tonight, and they're interesting places. There's always something on fire, and there's different things to try, and I heard the TV was on, and people were speaking German, and some of the words, I was curious. Well, what's the root word of that? I wonder how that grammar style works. Oh, not grammar. How that syntax works. So I'm really quite interested in how language works. Wittgenstein is one of my heroes, and he came from Vienna, the accents. So I feel like I really studied how my friends talk, and I listened, and then I tried to recreate that. When I was when I was a few years ago, I put on an southern accent for somebody, and somebody else overheard, and they thought he's not British. He's from Kentucky, and he's been putting on this British accent all the time. So I think, well, that's a good thing, right? It must have sounded convincing. So I think it's beautiful too, and you can hear so many different rhythms and just the way that some words have extra syllables, and some words like the way that people say high school, ha school, ha. I love that, ha school. I love it. It just the sound of it, how it goes up. It starts high and then it comes down low. It's like music. So I approached the language like music.
Yeah, I was out in Shanghai a few years ago, and I went to the post office. I wanted to post something back home, because I was going up to Beijing and I didn't want to drag it with me. And I was with a friend of mine who had the language, and so she went to the counter for me, and the person at the post office was trying to figure out how to package this and send it to Ireland. And all the people that were in the post office all gathered around, and I was just standing there. I didn't have a word of what they were saying, but it sounded like birds chirping after a while. It was like a cacophony of beautiful music. So yeah, there's something to that. Are you going to write something in a Cork accent at any point? You're beloved in Cork, so that's next on your list.
Well, Billy, I might try something like that, by.
No, that's a bit Hollywood. You're not flat enough. Um, we have more questions. We'll keep it going. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, there. This is there is a very musical quality to the prose in general. The book has been described as poetic and lyrical. Do you have musical or poetic influences?
Yes, actually, one of my big influences is Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet. Now, if you're familiar with Dylan Thomas, then you'll understand what I mean when I say I don't really know what the poems mean or they're about, but they sound lovely. And I love reading them to myself and memorizing them, and as if I know what they mean. Um, so I really like Gaelic, work. Irish writing is probably my favourite as well at the moment, present company included. But musical influences, yeah, I like the toccatas by Bach and the fugue because they work in such a unique way with the way they just lay it. And actually, I listened to a lot of Bach organ music while writing the violent scenes in this book. And I wrote them listening to Bach's organ music and looking at paintings by Caravaggio because I wanted that darkness, the intensity. I wanted like that the blood, I just wanted that for the violence. So there's a kind of an Italian 16th century influence in those scenes of violence. And I also listened to the Montagues and the Capulets, which is from an opera, I think, from Romeo and Juliet, and certain pieces of music, and then some old Hank Williams, get me in the mood a bit, but and some so a lot of different kinds of music. In fact, I enjoy music more than writing actually, except I'm tone deaf. I couldn't play anything. I can, the person at the back of the orchestra do the triangle. I'd get that wrong, so I'd better stick to making the tea. I think I aspire to be musical. I really, really try. It's very important to me. So I read all my work aloud before submitting it to see how it sounds, how it moves through the air. Your
Yeah, I
work,
think
Billy, is very lyrical and beautiful. How about you?
I think it's critical to you listen for the rhythms and the melodies in the sentences. I think that's the stories don't work without that. I think, and sometimes you wonder if other people can hear it when you're reading it, but you hope they can. You know, uh, I'll see. I'll keep going with the questions because they're piling up. So, given the past 12 months and all of the moments of grief and simple real love, do you feel launching this book during the pandemic changes the read of the story, or how do you feel about moments you wrote? Hmm.
So I have to unmute myself. Yeah, that's a good question. It's just there's been death on such an unprecedented scale, um, and for some people, they thankfully their lives have been untouched, and it seems like everything's sort of happening in an exterior world. But as soon as something it touches you, it comes into your life. The reality of what's happened, hits home. But I have to tell you, if there was a nuclear war tomorrow, and I'm hoping there isn't, because uh, I'm I've got some spaghetti bolognese in the fridge that I was hoping to finish. But if there was a nuclear war, I don't think I think I would when I get into writing mode, I'd be oblivious. There'd be a bit of a funny smell and maybe a bit of smoke in front of the computer, but no, I'd be in writing mode. So um, if there were cannons bombarding the city, I think once I'm in writing mode, I disappear completely into the story and I leave the world. And that's one of the great things about writing is it's a kind of meditation where I don't have any family photos or anything around my desk because I have to escape my life so I can go into another life. So It's a very good question, but you're almost, while trying to enter a different world, you're immune to what's happening in this one in a way. I mean, sometimes they coincide, but again, for me, it's a bit like dreaming. It's very instinctual.
I was just thinking, memory, you know, and you mentioned earlier about, you know, the way memories come at us, the sort of random way that they come at us. I often feel that like there must be no linear aspect to time as it passes. It just seems to park itself 1 inch from the side of your head, and it's all there. So you know the way something from, you know, if you ask me what you know what I had for my dinner yesterday, I sometimes I'd struggle to remember, but I can remember things from when I was 4 years old as if they're happening now. And so they must all be lined up, you know, right next to our heads. And you know, it's I wonder how much of it is just tapping into that all the time. You know, Bob Dylan used to say that in the 60s there was a river of songs flowing over his head, and he would just reach up and pluck them out of the air. And sometimes if he was busy in the day, he'd miss a song that he should have written, and a few months later he'd hear it on the radio being sung by Paul Simon or somebody like that. So, you know, maybe the stories are actually there. Maybe we're just tapping in. You know, who knows? But it's fun to wonder about. There's another question I better get to. I'm not very good at this kind of thing. I'm curious what the reaction has been from the real life people upon whom your characters are based.
Yes, I'm very curious too, and a little bit afraid, because my beloved friends, they haven't read the book yet, so I'm hoping that they. I hope they like it. I really do. But you know, people who've read it said that there's a lot of love in the book. So I hope so, because you know these people mean so much to me, and it was actually the big danger was sentimentalizing them. You know, I couldn't do that because then the book wouldn't be good. So I had to just pull back sometimes. You know. Yeah, so I'll let you know.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, it's about truth. It's about the, you know, and I think that's the greatest compliment you can pay to people is to tell their stories truthfully, you know, and I don't necessarily mean factually, but I mean the essence of them, you know, and in that sense, reading the book, it feels like just a thoroughly honest book. You know, one of the things I suppose, you know, I had a little bit of backlash for life sentences for my book from people who knew me, because there's things in the book that are unpalatable, you know, but at the same time, the people in the books, and I feel this about yours, is that they're not to blame for the things. We're not to blame for the things that are done to us. You know, we bear them and we, you know, carry on. And I think that's you know, that's heroic. I think that's something that, you know, they give medals to soldiers in wars. They don't give medals to people that survive awful situations. often not for themselves but for their children, or for, they do what it takes to continue. And I think that's the most admirable trait. That's, I think, if you write about those things, that's a very admirable trait. So if you want to.
Yeah, I think so. Because the world or the universe, I think, is indifferent to us. I mean, there's no real natural law. I mean, if one believes in a God and a religion, then one has the comfort that there are laws. And you might say that nature has a kind of intelligence, but if a dog kills a kitten, there's no justice for the cat. So there's no. I think it was Spinoza who said there's no law. There are no laws in nature. Laws is like morality laws, so to speak. And but we. What was the question again, Billy?
There was no question. It was just a thought. It was just about representing the difficult parts of people's lives as honestly as possible, and showing them the respect that they're due for bearing it and for surviving it. I suppose that was really just the point that I was going to make.
Yeah, it's a harsh and unjust reality that a lot of victims blame themselves, while the perpetrators, while the guilty feel no shame. And it amuses me that we live in a world where people can be so kind to each other, and at the other end of the spectrum, the opposite. I mean, I don't think there are squirrels who have such polarized ways of being. I think they kill baby birds from time to time because it's just a snack they can't resist. But there's not just one squirrel who's out undoing all the bad things of another squirrel. And I feel like in this world there are people who spend their lives clearing up after others, and those people deserve medals. If anyone here is listening and that's you, then I hear you, I see you. The person who holds things together. And those people really hold the world together.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I think it's time to sort of wrap things up. Maybe we could just on a maybe a slightly more positive or upbeat note. What's next for you? What are you working on? Is there another book in the pipeline?
Yeah, I do have another book. It's called The Presence of Absence. And that's a novel, and hopefully that will be out in 2023. And I've finished a children's novel too about 4 rabbits that live in a thrift store. And they kind of, they keep things rolling there and keep things coming and going. But it's a children's book, a children's novel. But like all rabbits, at some point in their lives, they find they have to save the world. So,
Yeah.
how about now? Billy's book is called Life Sentences, and it's breaking records in Ireland. It's not out in the US, but you can get it, I think, just by type Billy O'Callaghan Life Sentences on the internet, and you'll have an opportunity. It's a masterpiece, so I encourage you to get. Billy also read a horror novel called The Dead House, which I loved. You want to tell us about that, Billy?
No, I don't. I don't. This isn't about. This is we're here to sell a book tonight. It's not my book. Actually, we kind of we're going an hour now. And I think we could have a great conversation as well, just about titles, because all your titles they're like small poems. This is a beautiful title. Just maybe we could wrap things up and you could say a few words about the title and where it came from and what it means to you.
The title comes from a children's book called. It's a very serious children's book, actually, called Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, and it's by William. I was going to say William, but I've been in here too long. William Steig, and he also wrote Dr. De Soto about the mouse dentist, who has to get lowered in on ropes into the mouths of cattle because he's a mouse. So Sylvester and the Magic Pebble is about a child who disappears. It's a very good book, and it comes from that.
We're getting some funny feedback, so I suppose we'll probably wrap things up. This has been a great pleasure for me. I always enjoy chatting with my good friend Simon, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Maybe you'll be back in Cork before too long.
I'm running low on tea, so I might have to come over to Cork and restock, and see you in the process.
Okay.
Thanks everybody. Thanks Billy. Thanks Susan. I don't know what happens now.
No, this is a new one on me. I've used Zoom a few times, but this one is new to me. I suppose
this is going to be more interesting than the talk. See what happens.
Try to get out of it. Yeah. Okay. I think. Are we still? We're still here, are we? Yeah.
I think we are.
It's like you trapped in Vienna. Okay. Anyway, to everyone that tuned in tonight, I hope you enjoyed listening to Simon. And I hope everyone will go and buy Simon's book and buy a copy for your friends, and tell your other friends to buy copies for themselves. And it deserves all the success that's out there, and I'm sure it will be a great success. Simon is a brilliant writer, and there'll be lots more to come. Okay.